Well, thank you very much. This is based on an IPA Jeffries event which we ran at the IPA a couple of weeks ago. Nigel talked about what I'd call both broad and narrow marketing. Broad marketing, which is actually the most important, is the role of marketers in helping organizations maximize the value of the whole business through the customer experience. It includes narrow marketing, which is how do you maximize the net present value of the marketing budget. We're going to talk about the latter only, narrow marketing. Even though it's a narrow topic, it's actually, as you'll see, quite a big agenda. Starting off with, is there a double whammy right now, which is not only a squeeze on marketing budgets, and I'm thinking particularly in FMCG, but in addition, is there more short-termism in the sense that a higher proportion of those budgets are going into short-term sales activation rather than long-term brand building? Insofar as these trends are happening, what's driving them? Have they gone too far? And then, what should marketers do and what should CFOs and analysts do?
Hey, Paddy, thank you. I'm Martin Deboo, and I guess my qualification to talk about this is that I'm an analyst in the city now, writing research on companies like Unilever and Reckitt Benckiser, etc. But I started my career in ads, in agencies, so I've seen it from both ends. And I think my first and most important message is don't underestimate what is the crisis of growth at the moment in traditional consumer goods marketing. This is the average organic revenue growth rates of some of the world's biggest blue chip consumer goods companies by quarter since the start of 2009. You can't read the numbers on the chart, but you don't need to. The visual message is obvious. Top line growth rates.
It's not that slide.
Ah, dear. Okay, sorry. What a shame. There we go. Thank you. That one. Spoilt the next one now. Never mind. You don't need to read the numbers on the chart to see that the bars are getting lower. Top line growth rates are going down, and volume growth, which is the blue bar, which the likes of Paul Polman at Unilever will tell you is the only good sort of growth, is disappearing almost entirely. Now, the reasons for this are many and diverse, and it's outside the scope of the time I have with you today to explain why, but there are many cyclical and structural factors at play. But there are two very major and profound consequences from this crisis of growth. First of all, companies' earnings algorithms, as we call it. If you want to grow earnings per share by double digits, which is the sort of macho thing to be able to deliver to the city, clearly if you're growing your top line by 5%, you're getting half of your earnings growth from sales growth alone. And a little bit of work on the margin will soon get you to double digits. But when you're only growing top line by 2 to 3%, it's a much more difficult challenge to get that double-digit earnings growth. More of it has to come from bottom-line improvement, and the more of it that has to come from bottom-line improvement begs increasingly difficult questions about the marketing budget. So there's a very strong interaction here between marketing effectiveness in terms of the return between top-line growth and what you're investing in marketing. Second major consequence that I think Paddy would enlarge on is that when the pressure is coming on the top line, the pressure to do more things in the short term becomes greater. And I'd just like to talk a little bit more about that. So the chart that you did see is that actually, despite this crisis of growth, actually the evidence of reduced marketing investment amongst the UK's big blue chip advertisers in the consumer goods world that I cover actually is pretty limited. This is the advertising to sales ratio as reported to the city by Unilever, Diageo and Reckitt Benckiser, three of the UK's biggest consumer goods advertising spenders over the last 10 years. And actually evidence that they're cutting budgets is actually very limited. The rate of investment as a percentage of sales has actually remained remarkably consistent. I know David mentioned Unilever cutting agency rosters and things. That's quite true, but that's a cut in what we call non-working media. a phrase that the advertising industry hates, I'm sure, which is the agency fees and things like that. The commitment to media investment has actually remained remarkably consistent. But we did at H1 this year start to see perhaps the signs of a turn. Unilever have disinvested in the first half. Some of that will reverse in the second half. Reckitt have also disinvested. So there's beginning to be some signs under this acute top-line pressure that the margin equation is being, and the marketing investment within that is being questioned. And developing the short-term theme, there's clearly been a huge shift in the mix of activity. This just reprises some data from Ender's analysis that's presented at our conference. Direct response has now moved from 40% of total UK marketing spending to 50%, and as I'm sure you well know, the importance of digital within the direct response mix has expanded hugely. So there is a clear evidence of a shift in terms of mix of activity to digital activity, direct response activity. And finally, one very obvious way in which the world has become short-term is in agency tenures. If there's a barometer of short-termism, it probably doesn't get any better than this. When I was a lad in ads in 1984, the average length of a client-agent relationship was 86 months, 7 years. Now, 30 years later, it's 30 months, 2.5 years. Much, much higher churn, clear evidence of pressure for short-term results. So on that, Paddy, I'll hand back to you for some observations.
So why might this be happening? This big topic, listen very carefully, I shall say this only once, as they say. I'm going to just touch on a series of things. There are very good reasons for the pressure on accountability, but the more you put extreme pressure on accountability, the more you end up with things which produce demonstrable results on a reasonable time scale. In other words, it pushes you towards short-termism. Traditionally in FMCG, that was promotions rather than advertising. Now, because of digital, it's more about short-term sales activation rather than long-term brand building. Secondly, we're seeing, of course, this huge role of procurement. 23% of media agency deals and 18% of creative agency deals are agreed entirely by procurement people. That frankly stinks, but it's happening. All of which is strongly reinforced by digital. Now, digital is not a single medium, but digital being the most user-controlled set of media is primarily a direct response set of media. And of course, a lot of the growth, as we saw in the earlier chart, is search and online classifieds, which are simply better than traditional media at that particular task of sales activation when people are consumers are most of the way down the purchase funnel and need to be pushed, and especially if they're actually in the category looking for a purchase, they go on Google and so on. The internet's very good at that. The internet is less good at push communications, display advertising. Of course, it's growing very fast, but we still have a situation where TV, for very good reasons, remains the dominant mass media display medium. So digital is mostly direct response. That's simplifying a lot, but you saw in the numbers the way the market has spoken. And that's what's driven this sort of shift towards DR. Data analytics, very trendy topic, absolutely right. A/B testing and all that. It is largely tactical. It's about maximizing the effectiveness in terms of short-term response. It doesn't lend itself to long-term brand building because by the time, the whole point about A/B testing is it's very fast. The Googles of this world, the Amazons of this world, and so on. Very, very good at seeing which of these various treatments produces the highest immediate response. It again is reinforcing this trend towards short-termism. And then we've got these aggressive activist investors dramatically reducing marketing spend. And then the question is, in the medium and long term, what's going to happen? And the answer is, we don't know. Having said that, It is not the case that CEOs and CFOs don't understand that brands are valuable, and we now know this in a very interesting way, because other things being equal, they are willing to be paid less to work for a company with strong brands, because they benefit from the reputational effect of the strong brand, and that difference is particularly big for younger executives with more of their careers ahead of them. The thing which is widely believed among marketers, which is they simply don't understand that brands have value, that's not true. They're extremely skeptical about things like brand valuation and so on, because it's about the future and all of that. It's not the case that they don't understand the value of brand. It's then very important to remember that the main drivers of brand value in almost all categories are the broad things Nigel was talking about, which is overall customer and user experience, reinforced by communications, not what, again, some marketers tend to believe, which is advertising is the main way you create brand value. It's always a combination. So, have these trends gone too far? Well, they certainly, at the very least, may be biasing resource allocation towards underinvestment in long-term brand building. And the irony of this is that, as Bezos said at the time of the Amazon IPO all those years ago, brands are even more important in the online world than in the offline world. And according to WPP, the 5 most valuable brands on the planet are the top 5 US tech company brands. Okay? The irony being that digital has actually created or reinforced this underinvestment in brand building. I think I'd probably strengthen that bullet point. I think that the jury is pretty much back. Janet mentioned this book. Do read this book. Okay, this is Binet and Field coming back and updating their earlier work, now including a lot of the more recent IBA cases, particularly from the 2014 and 2016 competitions, virtually all of which have digital in the mix. So it's very, very up to date. And I have to say that the evidence of short-termism, meaning this shift having got to the point where it is destroying shareholder value, I think is actually now pretty overwhelming. Of course, we'll all be interested to see what happens to the Kraft Heinz market shares over the next 2 to 3 years. That will provide more somewhat anecdotal evidence, but you always need to keep coming back to the fact that, return on marketing investment is not like sort of one of the A-level physics constants we were taught. It depends, and it depends on how good the advertising is, how well you're spending your advertising money. So what are the practical implications for marketers? First of all, there's nothing fundamentally new about this. The exam question hasn't actually changed. It is about better ex-ante account planning. We are in the town where account planning was invented. And if you want to see good account planning, read some of the IPA cases in your category, okay? Because the prize winners are all good at account planning. In other words, this oil and water mixture of disciplined creativity, using insight and creativity together in a disciplined way, and then putting in place the metrics so you can then judge the effectiveness later and convince the judges. So all the prize winners have done that, otherwise they wouldn't be at the races. Secondly, ex post evaluation, and again, those two go together. If the account planning is good, you have the metrics in place and you can then do the ex post evaluation better. And the IPA cases are state of the art. No other country in the world has anything like as sophisticated a set of cases of account planning and evaluation. Don't assume that your finance colleagues are idiots. Okay? They do actually understand the value of brand, so start working more closely and openly with them, taking them through that quality of account planning and evaluation, the thinking and the evidence. And if a particular activity isn't paying for itself, don't try and cover it up. Okay? That is not good for your own brand within the organization. Finally, back to Martin, what should CFOs and analysts do?
Okay, Paddy, thank you. I'd just like to pick up on some of those points. And really, it's all about understanding and engagement and enlightenment. And I think in terms of the interaction between the marketer and CFO, I would like to strongly build on something which Nigel said in the first session, which is my big message would be, as marketeers, you must make sure that you can speak the language of finance. As Paddy said, the CFO is not some unenlightened Luddite. They are fundamentally supportive of the role of marketing investment in driving growth. But you, as the marketeer, have an absolutely vital role to play in connecting your consumer marketing language around awareness and imagery and loyalty and all the things that when I was a practitioner were so important in terms of building brands. But what matter to financiers and the markets, which is all around what is the contribution to top-line growth, and does that contribution to top-line growth generate a financial return? That begs questions of things like break-even analysis and discounted cash flow analysis. I would strongly urge marketeers to learn about and acquire. I think on my side, on our side, analysts, I think again, analysts to defend us collectively are not the tyrants and misers that you think we are, people who are fundamentally antithetical to marketing. I'm actually astonished sometimes at the degree of faith and belief placed in marketing investment by the analyst community. And I've seen company shares like Unilever's marked down on consensus-beating results that have involved a reduction in the marketing budget. So again, don't think of analysts quite in the caricatured way that maybe we're seeing. But I think analysts are collectively, I would say, not marketing savvy. We don't have an understanding and a skill set around some of these profound changes that are occurring. We lack, for instance, just a basic knowledge of the fact that a lot of marketing investment is purely defensive. It's not about growth. The work that Paddy has done, built on by Ehrenberg Bass, around the importance of penetration and therefore, the ability of big brands to build both loyalty and penetration simultaneously. That's not well understood. And of course, there is a huge knowledge gap and increasingly difficult questions being asked about, the commitment to digital marketing in the context of around 25% of consumer goods companies' budgets going in that direction. So it's really about dialogue and understanding based on the ability of marketeers to speak financial language. We're done, David.